Hello and welcome to the Flix Forum podcast, where each episode we go back and we look at a Netflix original film in the order of release. This episode, we have Netflix 185th film from 2019. It's the drama American Son, and I have not been drinking, so I don't know why I'm slurring my words. This is directed by Kenny Leon. It stars Kerry Washington, Stephen Pasquale, Jeremy Jordan, and Eugene Lee. I'm Jesse, and I'm here with MJ. How are you?
I am very well. I do enjoy often listening to you stumbling across some often difficult to read surnames or things like that. I think in the 185 episodes we've done, you've never struggled with the word episode. So maybe you're going on cruise control in your brain, and you need to really bring yourself out of that opening speech.
Yep, we need to change it up rather than just it's getting repetitive. We'll switch it for next week. We'll see if I can come up with something different.
Oh, I like that.
Oh, pressure's on.
It is.
I'm really looking forward to this one because I just have a feeling that you are not going to like this one. I know. I'm so excited.
Oh, interesting.
So excited.
Wow. Well, you'll find out very soon, as is the structure of our podcast. I will tell you very soon.
So we're trying to change the structure of it. Sorry, I'm very excited. We do start the show with a Fast Flicks, though, where we give our quick little summary of what it's all about. So give us your Fast Flicks.
Yeah, American Son is about a mixed race separated couple. They spend the early hours of the morning in a police station awaiting information on an incident involving their son.
Correct. Yeah, I'm very similar. I've just said there's a son is missing, and his parents nervously wait for news at the police station, with their relationship highlighting injustices.
Oh, yeah, yours is better than mine. You got me there.
Nah, I still don't really like it, but that's all right. We do like to sort of see how a movie comes to Netflix. This one I couldn't find an awful lot, but I'm sure you've got some excellent sort of information that you can share about American Son.
You could have asked me offline if I had anything. Look, American Son is based on the Christopher Demos Brown's Broadway play. It was also called American Son on Broadway. It opened during the winter of 2018. Kenny Leon, who directed the play, also directed this film, as does the entire cast return. So Kerry Washington, Steve Pasquale, Jeremy Jordan, Eugene Lee, all starred in the play, all star in the film. That's probably the main bit of interesting information I could find, because apart from that, they filmed this, and you know what? If you watch the film, it does have a big play feel to it. So I don't think they've gone crazy trying to use the elements that they can benefit from with being on screen. They've kind of almost just filmed a play for TV. And it premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival on the 12th of September 2019, which is interesting. That's only about just over a year after the play actually released initially on Broadway, which is pretty quick turnaround. And then it was released on Netflix on the 1st of November 2019. So things move quickly. It does get me thinking, like, Kerry Washington's obviously a pretty big name in Hollywood. Like, most people know Kerry Washington. It does, I think we're so sheltered, we're halfway across the world in Australia, that a lot of these big movie stars do go on Broadway. They do plays and things like that. And imagine just walking down to your local theatre and seeing Kerry Washington and so many other big names doing things on Broadway. That's a really cool thing that I never really think about. Because we don't get that in Australia.
True. That's a really, really good point that, you often hear about big name stars that are like, oh yeah, they're spending 2 months doing Broadway, or Springsteen. Oh, I'm going to spend a bit of time doing a show on Broadway, those sorts of things. So yeah, it's a good little thing to think about. And yeah, I think very little to add other than, I'm not sure if you're at the start of the film, which I picked up on, instead of saying it was a Netflix original film, they titled it with a Netflix television event, which was very interesting. So I think obviously it's a film and it's played at TIFF and those sorts of things. So it's interesting that they've highlighted that they wanted it to feel like an event rather than a feature, I guess, or a feature film. But
did this have anything to do with the fact that it was they became eligible for like TV Emmys and things like that? Do they have to do that for that?
Correct. Well, I think that's not necessarily, but I think it ties in very nicely with the awards, because it was nominated for 7 awards altogether. And the big one there, I guess, is that it was nominated for the Outstanding Television Movie at the Emmys, and interesting. So 5 nominees in that category, which you often see in award categories. You have about 5 nominees. 4 of them were Netflix out of the 5. 4 of them were Netflix productions. So a big year for Netflix at these Emmys, and the American Son's obviously one of them. There was a Dolly Parton special called Heartstrings. The other ones are ones that we probably know of. So El Camino, the Breaking Bad movie, was nominated as well. The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, it was a choose your own adventure Netflix special, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And what actually won was Bad Education from HBO. That was the Hugh Jackman one, which I've seen as well, which is quite good. Yeah. So
it's such a grey area though. What's because like can Power of the Dog win that this year? Obviously not, but like is it just a labeling thing? Because we just literally just watched a movie. This was a movie.
And Bad Education is a film as well.
Bad Education is a movie.
Yeah, but then you look at like El Camino, but that's based on a TV show. So does that make it like, so I don't know. Yeah. It's such an interesting little conundrum, I guess. Tagline. Did you see the tagline for this one?
I think I accidentally did, because I do like you revealing it to me, but I think I did.
Yeah, and I think it was horrible. It was, there's been an incident. It doesn't tell you anything. Yeah. It just give you nothing.
No, it's not a bad vibe thing though. Here's the movie. It's called American Son. There's been an incident. I don't mind it.
Okay, fair. There's only one good translation across the world for this one, which I really liked. And in Hungary, it was called Looking for Our Son, which I think gives a lot of context behind the actual film too. Nice.
All right, I'll give them that.
What's the consensus for this one? What are the critics and audiences saying about it?
Yeah, I will say actually, I think American Son is quite a good title. I think with everything considered, I think it's a pretty good title. Nothing against Hungary's version of Looking for Our Son. It's a little bit more explicit, but consensus is it's sitting at a 5.8 out of 10 on IMDb, and that's with 7,000 ratings. And Letterboxd audience liked it a little bit more, 3.1 out of 5, 5,282 ratings last I checked. So not bad. No, like anything we say anything over 3 stars is kind of a good. So Letterboxd is ticking that box, and IMDb is just a touch under that. 7,000 ratings and 5,000 ratings, not a massive amount of eyeballs for it, but I can't imagine this film would have cost a heap to make. It's one location. I don't know how many rehearsals they would have had to have. These guys are performing it on a nightly basis. So I think it's a pretty quick, easy, simple win, hopefully for Netflix. They'll be happy enough.
Yeah, there was a couple of little flashback scenes that probably cost them about $1,000. So that was about it, really. Other than that, it's
they were barely. Oh yeah, they were.
Yeah,
barely. Yeah,
yeah. Rotten Tomatoes, our last one. The critics, not big fans, 46%. That's on 26 reviews, so that's at Rotten. Audience, a little bit higher, 50%. So sort of that middle way marker, but 250 ratings, more than that. So that's a fair few people for Rotten Tomatoes that sometimes we don't often see from the audience getting on there to give it a crack. So interesting. All right. Early thoughts. What are your early thoughts? I've been hanging out.
You've already tried to put words into my mouth, it seems. I thought it was all right. I generally like dialogue-led stories, as you would know from our many movie discussions. I don't think this one entirely nailed it. It's one thing trying to sort of gain meaning and proposed ideals over this interaction between 2 people, but it's a whole other thing watching and a strange couple bicker for 20 minutes. Different enjoyable levels, you take different things out of it. But I can see how this would work well as play. I think it was lacking the emotional connection, though. I felt like everything was there on the surface. We're discussing these really deep pointed issues about a topic that really impacts us. I never really felt anyone went deep enough into their characters to really bring that out. Kerry Washington, maybe, but whether she didn't have anyone to bounce off or she was just a little bit off the mark, maybe over dramatizing it, I don't know. But it just didn't quite hit the emotional mark that it probably should have, to be honest. So that's kind of where I sit with it.
We're going to be very similar on our thoughts on this one, I think, which is going to disappoint me. I was hoping we were going to have a bit of a discussion. I like this. I did like it, but I probably wanted to enjoy it more than I did, I guess, because like we've already mentioned, it was pretty obvious, like really early on, that this was a stage show. And I think it
Wait,
would work
spoiler
really.
alert, by the way, just in case you're not going to do it. I'm not sure what you're going to say, but let's do a spoiler alert. So
Spoiler alert.
if you haven't seen it, we're going to spoil it very soon. Jesse probably won't spoil it right now, but I was just worried I thought you were going to go to the ending then. So
Good.
we're going to spoil it. So stop listening if you haven't seen it and you don't want it ruined. Watch it and then come back, listen to us, and we can have a good chat about it.
Good little pull up, because no, I'm not going to, but I think it would have worked well as a stage show. It would have worked well as a stage show. There's no issues in that at all. I think if you're in a small little theater on Broadway, this would have worked well. But I think similar to what you've said, I really struggle to empathize with any of the characters, because I don't necessarily think that they're characters. They're it's just like a dialogue heavy backwards and forwards of opinions, but maybe that's the point. And the idea is maybe no one can win these situations, and everyone's just as bad as each other without being able to come together on this. So I think it gives us a bit to talk about, at least.
I think that is the point, what you said. I don't think that excuses the fact that it felt like it was just words on a paper and no one really got that deep with it, which I'm not a huge theatre goer to be able to critique that side of things. I probably try and go once a year to the theatre, but maybe you can get away with that a little bit more. That I think maybe when you've got all these close-ups and you're digging into the facial expressions of characters a little bit more, that you can get found out if you're not really bringing the emotion, bringing the energy. I don't know, but something was lacking there for me.
Yeah, I think it's all valid. All right, let's talk about some characters. And as we mentioned at the start, really, like, as this is based on a stage show, there's really not a lot of people in this situation, and their interactions are all at various lengths. So I don't know how you're going to address this, but I'm interested.
Well, there's four characters. We genuinely don't see anything more than four characters, and two of them we don't see much of. But Kendra, played by Kerry Washington, she's I would say she's in the entire film. I don't think there is a scene without her. It's not a flashback or something. We're picking Kendra up at a very emotional stage of her life in this moment. Not only is she literally concerned with her son's well-being in that moment, she's dealing with separation from her husband, her son entering into adulthood and figuring out his place in the world, and dealing with her son, who's starting to recognize that racism in his life has kind of existed in his mum's life for this whole time, and he's been shielded from it for so long. And something about that is all just bubbling up at once. So this is where we're picking her up at that point. It's all kind of come to the surface, throughout this I guess interaction, or this hour or two that we see her. She's kind of almost understanding what it all means, all the things that they've tried to shelter their son from, and why they've tried to do it, and whether that was the right thing, and why it's all happening now. She's also discovering in this moment, maybe not discovering, but she knows now that her husband doesn't understand that side of things, and she's kind of at her wit's ends at trying to pretend that everything's okay. And that leads to some really interesting conversations and topics about race, and about the way people are perceived, and about the hardships that they go through, and about how someone who hasn't walked in those shoes simply can't understand that. And this is just like a whole world of hardship coming in the space of an hour and a half, 2 hours for Kendra. It's all hitting her at once, and ends in a big climax with everything just smashing over six in the end.
And that's a cricket analogy for anyone listening outside Australia, that you want to hit the ball over the boundary. Yeah, it's very hard to add anything further. I think as a character, and like I sort of mentioned before, it's hard to talk of these interactions as characters, more so what they stand for in society, I guess. And I found it hard because you're meant to be on her side. Like you mentioned, she's in every single scene. You're meant to be on her side. You're meant to feel the pain that she's feeling, not only as a mother, like as a parent, of not knowing where your child is. And that's sort of where it starts off with, that, she is distressed because her son, who's usually follows the rules, does the right thing, this is out of the ordinary for him. So you're meant to be on her side for that. But her interactions with everyone, almost comes across as like she's too righteous and maybe a little bit arrogant at times too. And you want to be on her side, and it makes it really hard to do that when she's so blatant in the words that she's using, which is 100% purposeful and 100% on track with what you want to get out of this film or this production, because that's what you want to hear. You want to hear these differing opinions and different relationships people have depending on their backgrounds and their cultures. And I think the idea of her being a psychology professor as well, I don't know that added anything other than to give her more room to be more arrogant. So yeah, I think without this the performance is pretty decent, but I think, as we mentioned too, it's probably, she didn't really change it much from if you're on the stage where you're yelling, you're screaming, so the person sitting in the back row can hear what you're saying. Whereas you've got to maybe tone it down a little bit for a film version, like you mentioned, because the camera is a lot closer. You're not trying to perform for someone who's sitting 20 meters away from you. So I think it's a really important character. I think the dialogue at times is really important, but at times as well, her ability to do it in a meaningful way to get people on side is missing, which makes it hard.
Yeah, I think she does over dramatize it at times, but I do think it's also pertinent what you say about. I don't think she is. I know where she's a main protagonist, but I don't think she is necessarily supposed to be liked, because I think every single one of these four characters has flaws that make it really hard to connect with any of them. But I also think that's part of the line, that this stuff that we're going through is complicated. There's no one person who's right. And it's Kendra who kind of takes that high ground throughout this entire performance. And then when Lieutenant Stokes comes in the end, he kind of knocks her off her pedestal a little bit. Like, yeah, you might think you understand this side of things, but you don't understand this side of things. And that's almost the whole thing, the whole vibe of this film is that, and this is the thing I took out of it the most, is that this stuff is complicated. It's not black and white. It's not, no pun intended. It's not black and white. And that's the thing that they get out of it. And I think if you made her this perfect mother who was just doing everything that you would do in that situation the whole time, then it makes it a little bit more, this is my view on it and this is who's right and who's wrong. And I don't think they wanted that, because I found her hard work. When she did things, I'm like, just don't. You're not going to get a response by acting that way. But that's what they wanted to do.
I think that, 100% perfect explanation of the film, really, because that's what it is. And I sort of mentioned that before. I think that not one person in this situation is right, and that's what we sort of need to think about in real life situations too.
So Big Scott Connor, the dad, strange old character for me. Runs really hot. He has a really short fuse. There were times when he obviously frustrated me with his, I guess, tasteless irrationality on some things, and others where I felt like he was genuinely trying to understand and be respectful. This is a man who, works for the FBI. He's a smart guy. He's worked himself up. And sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I can see how you've done that. You're trying to view it from another point of view. And then every now and then he just flicks a switch and, or he says something where I'm like, like he says at one point talking about Jamal, he says, my job is done, as he's like, he did this, he went to this school, he did this, he's graduating here, he's going there. My job is done. I'm like, I don't think even you actually view your job as a father like that. Like, I don't believe that that's what he actually thinks. And that's maybe when he just gets heated up, he says it. Or is it just that pompous, outdated male bravado thing coming through, which he obviously has quite a lot of that as well. But I found him really hard work, because there were times when I'm like, I think I'm agreeing with you and I like what you're saying. And sometimes I'm like, I just couldn't disagree with you more. And it's a really tricky character to try and wrap your head around.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe that there is anyone in the world that would actually speak the way he speaks. Like, and I think that's ties in with what you're saying as well, that I think there is good intentions in him as well. Like, they make little comments about he's still helping out with the dialysis for the mother-in-law, but then at the same time, especially with like talking about Jamal, his son, like it's like it's his prodigy, and they make mention about you didn't follow your dream, so you just don't want him to follow his. You're living the life through him and all these sorts of things. And I think that, and it's really, I think you've done an excellent job talking about him, because I find the idea of him being white, him being a member of the force, or like a law enforcer, he's left he's sleeping around with someone who's white, who's the opposite race to his ex-wife. It's like they tried to incorporate every one of the themes in this film through this one character, which makes it hard that it's like almost dumped a little bit through as well.
That's true. But then there's moments when Kendra is trying to explain what Jamal is going through from a racial perspective. And he's like, okay, explain it to me because I really want to understand. I'm believing him in this moment because this is a guy who's got to where he is by trying to improve himself. And then I'm like, okay, like I'm on board with you for a little bit because you're trying, and I know you run hot a little bit, but I guess you just. But then sometimes he does other things, and it was tough.
Yep, I agree. All right, talk about Paul Larkin.
Paul Larkin, played by Jeremy Jordan. So he was the cop. I think for me, he's the example of this normalized casual racism that we see day in, day out. On the whole, this guy tries really hard to diffuse the situation and play by the book while still trying to recognize Kendra's unease. I think he truly does. When he says, like, I understand what you're going through, I think he knows what she's trying to go through. And in all honesty, he doesn't really have much information available to him. He's not really holding back on her. But his racial stereotyping is the kicker for this. Like, this is a guy who wouldn't identify as being a racist himself. And he comes off as generally a nice guy, nice family, I'm sure, but albeit a little careless in his interactions. And he's making these subconscious decisions on people based on their skin color. And it's as simple as that. He doesn't really mean anything by it, but when he's trying to get a profile of who Jamal is, he's being racist. And I think that's really well captured. And I think that point coming across in the film is, and this is probably something that we've learned as a society in the past 10 years, is that casual racism is so prominent, and you don't want kids growing up in a world where that sort of thing is part of what they think and who they are. And so many people wouldn't think of themselves as being a racist person, and yet they would be making these little decisions in their own mind about what they think, and all of a sudden they're being a little bit racist, and that changes, and we got to get that change. And I think he's an example of that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the idea that you've mentioned, like, he wouldn't see himself as racist, and this is where there's so much, people need to understand and work out that their words may not be racist to them, but it's how it's interpreted by someone else or how it's seen by someone else. And if someone else is able to say, hey, what you're saying is offending me, or what you're saying is inappropriate, or it's racist, then it is. So it's not necessarily that you're intending it by saying it. It's just, like you mentioned, the way that people have been brought up, or the way that they've acted in the past. These things need to change. And the idea of him following the book, and I don't think it's necessarily just him based on his preconceived ideas on race as well, but it's a little bit about gender too, and the way that he interacts with Kendra compared to when Scott walks in, and the way he's more open, and he's more willing to talk and speak in a much nicer tone. Just these little things is a complete like you mentioned, the idea that this guy follows those preconceived ideas that of how to act, or how he thinks he should be acting in these situations.
It's a funny thing though, because I can't actually imagine living in a world without people making these snap judgments based on race, rightly, wrongly, negatively, positively, whatever it is. I can't imagine it. And I don't know if that's just because that's the world we've grown up in. And is it possible that the next generation and the generation after that can grow up in a world where it legitimately, the color of someone's skin doesn't mean anything? I don't know, mate. But like, I think what we're trying to do is educate people to let's see if that can happen. But let's see if we can get to a point. And I'm saying, like, even positively talking about someone's skin color, like, I'm not saying it has to be negative, but it would just be very nice to see that change. And I don't like, it's an enormous global change, but this situation is, it's so common.
Yeah, I mean, like, you meet, if you go on a trip overseas and you meet people from other countries, like you try to think of something common that you have in common. So like, you see an Italian guy, oh, you like soccer or football. Like, you see an Indian dude, oh, you must like cricket. These aren't things that you're purposely trying to be offensive or anything, but it's just like, oh, there's a commonality that I've got, but I am stereotyping you through that, trying to connect, which there's got to be a different way to do it. Yeah,
it's a good point. Look, we got one more character, Lieutenant John Stokes. I got some big thoughts on him, which I didn't realize I had at the time. I think it's more on reflection. Because because we probably see a side of the dice that neither Kendra or Scott has explored. And we obviously have probably like 45 minutes of this film, Kendra and Scott discussing big topics. But the stigma with race is also a similar stigma with police. If the argument for racism comes down to a minority of people in a certain race doing the wrong thing, and then the entire race being painted with that same brush, well, the same thing is going on with the police. You know, the idea of shoot the cops and then all the riots about police. You know, there are some police who have done the wrong thing, but is it fair to assume that they're all doing it? And that's exactly the same complaint as racism. If a black person robs a store or steals a car, does that mean all black people are thieves? Similarly, if a policeman kills an innocent black man, does that mean all policemen are racist killers? And I think this has been a huge topic around the world, particularly in America. And these two parties have been at loggerheads with each other, and it's a deliberate decision to make this cop a black man. He's kind of got his foot into, I guess, negatively explored groups, and he's basically seeing it from a cop perspective more than anything else, and explaining it to Kendra. It's like, you might think that this is what's happening, but don't get me wrong, this is happening as well. And your son, putting fire on the issue with his bumper sticker. And I think that's a really interesting, that's a really interesting topic to explore on the back of racism. It takes me back to this footage, last year when all those riots were happening in America with black people and the policemen. I remember seeing some footage of a black man going up at a riot and hugging a policeman, and all the black people there were basically booing this guy, like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And his response was, what'd this guy do to me? You know, how are we going to solve any of this if we just respond hate with hate and not recognize that there's people doing the wrong thing, but the majority are doing the right thing? And if we can try and appreciate the people doing the right thing, and then we can try and solve this the right way. And I don't know if this movie explores that as well as it was just a theme that I had in my head that was brought up again. But I think it's a really powerful thing. These two groups, the black people suffering racism and the policemen obviously having people watching them like a hawk for doing the wrong thing. They're really big social issues at the moment. And I kind of enjoy that they brought this in to the story as well.
I really like that take, because I really struggled once he entered the screen.
I also thought he lacked human connection, and that's just a personal thing for that character. But I think the issue that he brought up was wider.
Yeah, I think you discussed the issues that he brought up excellently, and I think you've banged right where I was going to go with that. His inability to just show one connecting ability with Kendra would have made it more bearable. I think just one little line or one little thing of, like, rather than using the word sister and her being offended by it, like, be like, I'm here for your sister or something like that showed some sort of connection with them. Because as you mentioned, he's purposely a black cop, so you want to see that, and I completely understand where they're going with the ideas of this. Just some sort of connection between the two would have added a little bit more context or a little bit more emphasis to the idea that he brought to the table. Because a lot of the stuff he was saying to Kendra really annoyed me watching it. I was like, this is a woman who's down and out. She's already had to go through the bureaucracy of the secretary, go through Larkin, deal with the issue with her husband. I just needed some sort of sparked in her eyes to say, hey, someone's on my side a little bit, and then he can go full belt at her if he needed to.
He did yield too much power, which kind of perpetrated the issue of good cops, bad cops, things like that. And his thing is like, like, black people are getting mad at cops, but you know what? We're trying to talk about how we protect the black people, who's protecting the good cops, kind of thing. But I didn't like him, but I guess if we had liked him, then that would go against the fact that every one of these characters is flawed in some way.
Yeah. And I'm just going to briefly mention Jamal. I know we don't meet Jamal, but I think it needs to be touched on, just for the idea that through his character, we do get to learn a lot more about, in particular, the relationship between Kendra and Scott, I guess, and the idea that, he's that one grounding point that, they agree on. Like, everything else in their relationship, there's very little that they agree on, whereas they agree that they've brought something special into the world. And the idea of why Jamal's going through this identity crisis because of this split up, because of the dad leaving, and you know they have little touches on his life as well, and his issues in having to deal with these same themes and ideas of being at a school and being the only black kid at the school, and you know that idea of how much pressure it puts a young person on being the face of that whole race, and the tricky situations that can bring as well. So even though we didn't meet him, he still added quite a bit to the context of the story.
Yeah, I had a bit to say about Jamal more in the theme section, but it's relevant to bring up here. I think the idea that firstly this movie or this play and whatever it is called American Son, and the American son is Jamal. The fact that they make this boy half white and half black, it makes the conversation more accessible, more so to a white audience, because I think it's a very accessible conversation to a black audience anyway. The idea that, you know, that could be my son. I as a white man, I could have a half black son, and it makes you recognize that these stigmas that we're talking about in the story affect everybody. And it even if you sort of can feel separated to a lot of these movies that talk about racism and go, oh, well, you know, it doesn't really affect me, and I'm not racist, I'm not the problem anyway. This is a way that it kind of draws everyone in and go, firstly, it can affect everybody, and secondly, make sure you do listen, because this is important to talk about. And they do it well by making Jamal a mixed kid.
Excellent. The director, Kenny Leon, what interesting story.
Kenny Leon. Well, to be honest, I don't know Kenny Leon, but I have basically ripped his IMDb biography off here because it is interesting. He's a Tony Award-winning Broadway, and he's a film director. His Broadway credits include the revival of Children of a Lesser God, the two-pack musical Holler If You Hear Me, Raisin in the Sun starring Denzel Washington. That's kind of cool. The Mountaintop starring Samuel L. Jackson, Angela Bassett. Stick Fly, produced by Alicia Keys. Like, look at all this stuff that he's done. He also, I'm sure, he did some television works for Hairspray Live and The Wiz Live on NBC, but I wonder if that was filming of the live stage show as well. So he's also directed a little bit of TV. 6 episodes of Dynasty, which I remember my wife used to watch that. It looked truly horrible, Dynasty.
I did, when that revival came on, I did stick with it for about a season. It was horrible TV, but it was just intriguing.
So yeah, he's good on Kenny Leon. He's great.
Yeah, and I like you mentioned, the Hairspray Live and the Wiz Live, they were pretty popular for a couple of years there. So you can see why a project like this could translate well for him on the screen as well. And I think he did an episode of the Gossip Girl revival, the new Gossip Girl series as well. So he may be branching up a little bit. Yes, I think a couple. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a few episodes out. Yeah, I haven't watched it either. Another one that I probably watched the first season of. That was about it, of the original. XO. All right, let's talk about some scenes. What are some scenes that you liked? Oh, I mean, it's really all one scene. This whole thing's one scene, really. So, what are some moments of this? Some bits, this interaction.
Some bits that I liked. Yeah, I liked the rain. I have to say that first and foremost. I think definitely it set up that there was something foreboding about it, but it also added a layer of danger, knowing that the sun was out there, and that feeling of being trapped and hopeless, and making it really hard to find what you're looking for, and having that vision obscured. I think the rain was actually captured really well. I know it's such a cliche in these sorts of things, but it did feel like she was trapped in there in some capacity. So that worked well. Stop laughing at me.
It's funny because I've got this in like my takeaways for like later on, where I'm just like,
oh, you love touching on the water.
Rainstorm. Could it be any clearer that some bad things are happening? Anyway. I liked when Kendra was explaining her fears of having a black son, and how her husband just can't understand that. And as much as you try and articulate it, you can't. And that's the idea of it being, this is such a complicated issue. Like, we're not trying to make sure every single person agrees with what we say. We're just going to tell you how we feel and why we feel that way. And hopefully you can understand as much as possible. You're never going to understand it fully. It was well captured. I enjoyed parts of the dialogue, the bits when you want to agree with them, but then something doesn't quite fit, so you reassess. And I think that's what you want to get out of a dialogue-led story. It doesn't have to be just like, yes, that's right. Yes, that's right. It's like, I really agree with that. And then there's a rebuttal and you're like, that's a really good point too. And that's why, this thing is that the complication is so compelling.
in this story. And they did that from time to time. It hit really well. And then the finale, it really does hit like a slap in the face. And I think this story 100% needed it, as much as you don't like seeing people die. But I think the story would have just petered out if it was just like, and here he is. Yeah, he put his hands in the car and nothing happened and it was all done. But geez, we learned some stuff in this conversation, didn't we? No, like I think it's nice that it felt so safe the whole time. It wasn't until probably near the back third of the film that I thought maybe he's dead. I kind of started to think maybe he's dead. And I thought, you know what, if he's not dead, I'm going to be disappointed, because we needed this conversation to lead somewhere where it's not just going to be forgotten about, and everything that we've talked about has actually meant something, because we were trying to dissect what Jamal's going through, and hell, we were right on the money with it. And all of a sudden he's not around anymore. And maybe we do need to take more out of these conversations, as opposed to just being like, oh, hey, he came out and we went and had breakfast at the diner around the corner and nothing came by it. So it actually felt stronger by killing him in the end.
Good. I like that. I think I liked the conversation between Kendra and Larkin, where, she was asking if he had kids too, and, very specific with, do you have any black kids, any black sons, highlighting that the idea of, the differences between them. He's got white daughters that are probably at home, fast asleep in the bed, and like you mentioned, it's a dark, stormy night, and she doesn't know where her son is, and that's why we're getting that overreaction from her, or that almost craziness of everything or anything that's said. She bites back. I thought this was really funny and really well done when we first see Scott walk in and Larkin assumes that it's Lieutenant Stokes. I thought that was, he starts blabbing all the information to him and talking about Kendra being a, out of control bitch, and went from zero to ghetto. I just thought that was really funny, and just highlighting those differences between his ability to share information with a white cop
male.
Once he finds out, male as well. So I thought that was good. And then just little, like you mentioned, there's heaps of these discussions between the two where there's moments you pick up and go, that's a really good point. And I think the one part that sort of just highlighted the difference between this couple is when Scott asks for his coffee and he wants a black coffee, and Kendra just says, oh, well, and sort of walks off. And I just thought that was a great understanding of their relationship and where it was at.
Yeah, that was a bit on the nose for me.
Yeah, good. Well, let's give us some things.
No, but I did, look, it wasn't a bad scene. It wasn't. I was like, yeah.
What are some things that you didn't like?
Not a heap. Like, there parts of hearing a couple just constantly disagree and bicker about their relationship, I thought was tiresome, and it was overdone. When they got into the media issues, it was really good, but there was too much time them talking about, like, I don't like you speaking with that certain language, because we've spoken about, and like, I wasn't there to see that kind of movie, and I think they did too much of it because it just didn't work and it wasn't important. And the only other thing that I didn't like was the escalation of Scott being arrested. I don't know if that was just to have, I think it probably was just to have Kendra and Lieutenant Stokes in the room together for a little bit to have that interaction, but that whole escalation scene didn't work for me, especially because Scott, I know they just saw the video, but Scott was better than that. Like, I know he had a short temper, but he knew the ramifications of what he was going to do, and that force was never going to get him anywhere. And it just felt like a stupid decision for the sake of a stupid decision.
Yeah, and I think the idea of him, like, obviously it's a stage show, so you got him off stage for a moment, and then to come back in and just be like, oh, they've released me on bail or whatever. I'm like,
yeah, it was pretty.
Who's paid the bail? Who's got you out? Where's all the paperwork? It's like, yeah, all a little bit too quick and too convenient.
They had to get him off stage somehow, didn't they?
Yeah. The fountain down the hall, the two segregated drinking taps with the plaque, I thought that was a little bit too much. With the amount of dialogue and other things that were discussed, I don't know that we needed that as well. We sort of got the gist of what was going on.
Good point.
A lot of the things that we've spoken about too, with Scott talking about the way he talks about Jamal as a father, about spending so much money to send him to school, and I think he said, I won't let him regress. No one says that. And I sort of mentioned that before in the character. They're just not, be human, show some human elements and be like, I can't let all this hard work go to waste on my son. Don't, it just makes it more personable, I guess.
He treated him like a project, didn't he?
Rather than his own son. Lieutenant Stokes, just the attitude in his scenes just really, I just couldn't really deal with that towards the end when we'd already had such long, lengthy discussions and dialogue between the couple that it just sort of to back that on the end, sort of, yeah. And the final scene, it completely got me too. Like I felt really emotional with the revelation from Stokes to the family, but I think the reactions from both parents as the camera fades off to outside just missed the mark completely. I just thought that on a stage they probably work well, but to me,
I
just missed the mark. Just they needed something emotional to show, not some screaming.
Scott's reaction was so wooden.
Yeah.
And I do think Kerry Washington over dramatized so much of this just to try and make it work. And I didn't feel it, but you're definitely right with that. The story side of killing him off was good, but that was a pretty bad taste.
Good. All right. What are some themes and ideas? We've touched on most of these already, but are there any further thoughts?
Well, it's kind of been hard not to talk about them. I mean, that idea of not understanding where everyone else is coming from, whether it's race, whether it's police violence, whether it's just general prejudice. I mean, it's a strong theme in any kind of film. Yeah, it's such a nice message to say you can never actually truly understand where someone's coming from until you've walked in their shoes. And I think they definitely do it here. They go a lot deeper into those two issues, but we've sort of spoken about that one enough. And I think the big theme that I take out of this is that these matters that we've talked about, they're so damn complicated. And I guess that's why something like racism, there's no solve for how we can deal with racism because it is so complicated. The idea that, hey, we did the wrong thing, I'm going to apologize and we're going to try and make it better, that's not the answer sometimes. And the idea that we sort of want to treat people a certain way, well, not everyone wants to be treated a certain, there's no right or wrong to this. And I think what you do learn out of it is to just try and be as respectful as you possibly can and recognize that you're never going to truly understand how they feel about a certain thing.
Yeah, I harp on with the same things there, and that was through Larkin, that idea of understanding, I guess. And he said it over and over again. I understand, and you can't understand. There's situations where you can say pretend that you're in someone's shoes, but just like Scott can't truly understand his own son. That's why Kendra is so scared of this world that it might hurt her son, because there are people that aren't ever going to have to experience the things that they've experienced. And that leads into, like, who is Jamal trying to be? And he's got these conflicting backgrounds, these different parents of different races that lead to who do I want to identify as. And then the idea too, I guess, a little bit with the patriarchy, the men rule this world, really. These four characters, three men, Kendra's often left out. And it leads into that police inadequacies too, not just the ideas, but you've got the three males in this are all a part of the law enforcement, and none of them seem like real people. So, at the same time, is this sort of having a little bit of a whack on the police as well, and leading to that idea of, maybe we need to change the system or look at a different way of doing it.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's definitely that explored to some extent. I don't think it's a full whack for police, but I think there's highlighting some issues with it.
Yeah.
It's a pretty messed up system. Like, I guess in a sense, they're not giving him information because there's people that have just been shot dead, and there's probably some formalities and a report to be written up. I genuinely, Larkin did not know that the whole time. He had no idea that their son was dead. So.
True. All right.
And neither did Stokes when Stokes first walked in either.
Yeah, he hadn't seen the video. Yep. Yeah. No,
he hadn't seen the report.
The report. What did you take away from this one?
I took a lot away, and I think most of it we've spoken about, but I think the irony of this film is that every single one of these four characters acted poorly at some point. They were flawed characters. They weren't great people in general. And I think a lot of them would have loved to have had their time again, the way that they attack a certain situation that they were in. But the irony of all this stuff that went on is that none of it would have changed the result. Throughout this entire film, Jamal was dead. And the reason that they were all there was to find out about the well-being of their son. And they went through all this turmoil with each other, learning things about each other, threatening each other, talking down to each other. But none of it mattered, because the thing that they were there for was never there in the first place. And I find that quite ironic. And almost a little bit clever the way that they've made this film, that we put these people in a situation where the one thing that they want was actually never achievable, but let's see how they'll react.
Good observation. For me, it's really hard to make a film work just in one location. And at the end of it, I was sort of like, what are some examples? And I couldn't stop but thinking about the film we did a long time ago on this podcast, the Indian one, Sometimes, where we had that waiting room where there's a whole bunch of people waiting for those blood tests. And I know that it wasn't all necessarily in that one waiting room, but the idea of a whole bunch of characters being in one room waiting for some announcement or something to happen, it just really reminded me of that. And
we had lots of flashbacks for that one, didn't we?
We did, yeah. There were lots of flashbacks, and they weren't necessarily all in that waiting room at the one time, but just that scene of the bunch of people in that waiting room and the tension between them just sort of reminded me of this film and how a situation like this can be done well as well.
Yeah, well, 7 Años, they win. They start outside of it and they leave. They enter their office, but
yeah,
that was all in one location. Which I don't know if you know, but on Letterboxd, that's actually changed to 7 years in English. It's actually called 7 years. I know Años means years, but I liked having 7 Años there. Letterboxd.
That was we were on that earlier. All right, let's
great movie.
Did you go on IMDb at all to look anyone up?
I did not. No, I knew Kerry Washington and I didn't know the others.
I looked up Stephen Pasquale, who played Scott. Just the voice. The voice was like so familiar because I thought maybe he'd done some animated work, but no, it was a bust for me. Nothing that I recognised him from at all.
Yeah, you're right. He does have a familiar voice.
Got that sort of tone that's like it sounds like some sort of character from something, but no, didn't have a hit. All right, okay. Question time. Did you have any questions that you wanted to ask?
I've only got one. How were you anticipating that this movie was going to end? And I guess I'm just probably more talking about Jamal, but I guess in general, how did you? Because you get to a point in a movie where you're intrigued enough, and you're like, I love a movie where I'm watching it, I'm like, I have no idea how this movie's going to end, and I love that about a movie. And it doesn't mean it's going to end well, but what were you thinking sort of halfway through the movie? How do you think this movie was going to end?
I wasn't even considering what was going to happen because I was so involved in the conversation between Kendra and Scott and more about where their arguments were going to lead rather than what was the actual outcome. And I don't know, maybe I got a little bit lost in that they're actually there to find their son at times because it was more their discussions between each other and their inadequacies as a couple, as well as the commentary on race rather than what was going to actually happen to the son. I didn't actually think of, I wasn't actually thinking the whole way through. Is he going to be okay?
I think that's what they want. They do make it feel pretty safe about Jamal being in any kind of real danger. And the idea when Steve walks in, he's like, I know he's just in a room there. Can we just talk to him? And there's not really that sense that he got killed at any point. And even when Stokes is saying his speech, I mean, I started to cotton on. Back in my mind the whole time, like, I reckon he could be dead. I think this is a way this film could go. But they do a really good job. And that's probably to your point, Jesse, because they want to keep you in the moment. But also they do want to have that impact at the end. But I just think they do such a good job of making it safe because you can overdo that and be like, they're making it so obvious that he's okay that I'm sure he's dead. But they don't overdo it. They just kind of just push it to the side and say, it's actually not important. What's important is what we're talking about. So let's stay in the moment.
Yeah. Good observation. How on earth could Kendra and Scott have been a couple? Like they had a nice cute meet, obviously, or meet cute or whatever it is these days. But how on earth could they have been together for as long as they were?
I know. I thought the exact same thing. So these looks like they've separated quite recently, it seems. Yeah. Jamal's 18, probably were together, married for a couple of years, or let's say together for probably 3 or 4 years minimum before having kids. There's no way these guys seem like a 20-year married couple. It just didn't work.
No, good. All right. The bumper sticker, so I think the line on the bumper sticker that they said it was shoot cops with your camera phone whenever they make a bust. So it's got that double meaning. It's got that idea of shoot cops.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not as bad as like they're like a sticker that says like "F the police, full out" or anything like that. So I'm a little bit torn as to the discussion around that bumper sticker so much, because yes, it's got that second connotation to it, but it could have been so much worse and so much more emphasis on something.
I think you need to read that bumper sticker as saying "shoot cops," and that's it.
Yeah,
because that's what anyone. That's the only thing you can really read unless you're standing up close to it.
Okay,
that's the impact they wanted to have.
Cool, good. Maybe a visual of it would have.
True.
Something would have. I don't know. Just reading that out loud to me, I'm like, I'm reading it literally, obviously, and I know that it's got that meaning, but to me, it just would have had more impact if, you put in like a specific thing like "F the police" or "kill cops" or something like that.
It's almost like a clever way of getting around it, because when they say you can't have that on, you're like, "What? Yeah. Look what it says." And it's like, "Oh, well, but no one can read that."
Yeah, fair. I like that.
It fits Jamal's character. Smart dude. He's got a thought on it, and he's like, "But you know what? I'm not going to go all the way."
True. Last one. So this is from Decider.com. This is a line that they put in there about this film. They said, "These aren't characters; they're point of views. This isn't drama. It's a checklist of points addressing the most vexatious social problems in America today." Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean that might be a little bit too damning, but I think that's the issue that you and I kind of had, is that we didn't feel like these characters were very three-dimensional. We felt like these were lines of dialogue that were being spoken and not really felt.
I think if you take out the word checklist from that and say it in a different tone to the way I said it, it can come across as a positive, because it doesn't necessarily have to be about characters. You don't
helps though.
It helps to have characters that you can agree with, or you can get on board with, but it doesn't like
or believe. You need to believe them though.
You need to believe. Yep. Yeah, that's fair. Good. All right, I think we're ready to bring it all together and come up with a rating out of 5. So where are you going to fall with this one?
This was quite a meaty discussion, which actually did not surprise me. There's a bit there. Yeah. Look, I don't know if this film entirely works from start to finish, but it's compelling and it's poignant and it's thought-provoking, and it does have that ability to pull you in from time to time. And I'm disappointed that the characters are flawed, but it did allow us as an audience to ponder these issues without necessarily being spoon-fed an ideal. They're not trying to say what's right and wrong at any given time. And there's an array of complicated social issues that are explored, and you walk out of this with no real clarity on the best way to handle it, and that's okay because it is complicated. So just keep trying to educate yourself and listening to others, and I think for that reason, I'm still going to give it 3 stars.
Nice, yeah. I'm conflicted, I guess. Because I was engaged the whole time. It wasn't that, I wanted to hear the backwards and forwards of the characters, and I was hanging on to sort of see where it was going to go, even though I wasn't necessarily worried about Jamal. I was wanted to see where these characters were going to go, but in saying that, I think that at times the dialogue and the interactions probably needed a little bit of changing for the film adaptation from the stage show, because I'm guessing it's a pretty verbatim translation. So. And the message, it's blunt, and that's not going to be for everyone. But where else can you really hear and see such clear messages that you can just sit there and listen and be like, "Cool, I'm taking this in." So I'm giving it a 3.5 still, I think. So good, because it's a 3.25. Solid.
It is. Solid. It's so good. Like, how often do you get exposed to this kind of situation where someone is going to spend the better part of an hour talking about what these issues are for a Black person growing up, not necessarily in America, but anywhere, Black person growing up and the issues that they have to face, and someone's just telling you that, and it's like, yeah, this is actually kind of important to hear.
Imagine if they had put a bit more cash into it and changed it up a little bit. It could have been a huge film.
Yeah, I don't think that's what they ever. No, I think this is going to be a quick, easy win for them.
Passion project. We're on socials. We've got Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Question I just wanted to ask: would you be interested in seeing like a stage version of this? Do you think it would be nice to see it in a different form?
I think I would prefer to see this in a stage version. Yeah, I think this lends itself to being a stage play.
Exactly. I wouldn't mind seeing like an Australian adaptation in relation to Indigenous peoples and their relationship with police as well. I reckon that would be a cool little thing to see.
That would be wonderful, actually, with the right people behind it to get that messaging correct. Because it's such a simple premise, right? Like, it's not going to break the bank putting a production like this together. That would be really good.
Get an Indigenous crew, cast, creative team on board to do this, and I think it would be just as impactful.
The issue would be getting the right audience into watching it.
Yeah,
the people that would go and see it would probably be the people that don't need to. Not don't need to, but
true. The ones that would be on board for that message already. Yeah, true. Very true.
Yeah. But anyway, no, that doesn't stop the fact that if you do something like that and it becomes a big thing, then it becomes a wider talking point, and then everybody wins.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're back next week. We're switching up a little bit. It's a 2019 film still. The Indian Hindi language action heist film. We might have to get Hida back on board. It's called Drive. It's directed by Karan Mansukani. It stars Sushant Singh Rajput, Jacqueline Fernandez, Virkramanjeet Virk, Sapana Pubby, Pankaj Tripathi, and Bowman Irani. That's what we've got next week.
Definitely a change of pace from where we are right now.
Yeah, so get on board if you're interested in following next week. That's what you can watch on Netflix. Not the Ryan Gosling Drive. It's the 2019 Indian Hindi language film.
Oh, wouldn't that be a blast when we come in to record? I thought Gosling was great.
As always, it's always nice to talk about a film that we watch, and I think your way you put your thoughts together today were excellent. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. No, you as well. I think this is one of those films that you watch and you think about. And for me, I start to write some notes after I've watched it, and the ideas kind of come out. And that's why it's so good that to have like a film reflection, whether it's like on a podcast like this or just chatting about films with your mates. You start to think about things that you didn't actually think about in the moment, and you piece together why it works and why they did a certain thing, and it's fulfilling.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I will see you next week.
You certainly will. See you then, mate.
Bye.